Welcome to MediaScope's last live Friday chat for 2015. My name's Denise Schravel. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, editor of Mumbrella, Alex Hayes. Megan Brownlow from PricewaterhouseCoopers did try to join us. Unfortunately, we had an audio problem. She may be able to fix that at some stage and may be able to come back in. But in the meantime, Alex and I will hopefully be able to give you great coverage of 2015 and have a really good chat. So welcome, Alex. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, Denise.
That is a pleasure. And thank you to those who are watching us live. I can see Dana, Dobby, thank you very much. And feel free, of course, to add any comments. We can reply to those. Alex, want to have a chat about 2015 and really wrap up the year. I don't know about you, but I'm certainly feeling quite exhausted at this end of the year. It's been a really busy, challenging but exciting year. So first of all, if I can just perhaps get your big picture overview of 2015, some of this, not necessarily the individual issues, but kind of your big picture overview.
Absolutely. I think it's been a very interesting year. I don't think it's been the year a lot of people thought it would be. So I don't think it's quite sort of fragmented almost as much as some people thought it was going to. So obviously we sort of started the year and there's a lot of talk about streaming services coming in. So there was Stan, there was Presto, and then obviously Netflix is the big fish. And everyone thought, this is going to herald the death of TV, for example. But, what we're seeing actually is that the TV networks are kind of recalibrated and come out with their own sort of products to try and counter that threat a bit. I think what we've also seen is people perhaps taking, or sort of media buyers maybe taking more of a realistic approach to digital. So where they've been throwing big budgets and sort of more and more money into maybe programmatic or, sort of online content, that kind of thing, I think a few advertisers have taken a little step back now. And I think they're actually sort of looking at it as in, is this really going to be an effective sort of mass reach channel? And, what should I be doing? Can I build a brand on this platform? And I think that's been sort of very interesting. And then later in the year, we had, things like diversity cropping up as a bit of an issue. And I know that's obviously something very close to your heart, Denise. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that.
Because you wrote an article about that, so we certainly will talk about that. Anything else, big picture for the year that's really been on your mind or on your radar?
Yeah, I think, we had the MediaComp's stuff, and that's probably led to more of a conversation around transparency and sort of the relationship, I think, between marketers and agencies. And that's not just media agencies, but actually, advertising agencies and PR and, where different agencies are fitting into that marketing mix and who actually owns which part of that funnel now.
Exactly. It has been a really interesting year. I think it's interesting also that you say that it's not perhaps the year that we were expecting, ago. For me, the year has really been about, we've come out of denial. So if we think about the disruption process as a process, and it goes in certain phases, I think for a long time we were like, no, nothing to look at here. This year, I think we've actually been having some pretty honest conversations about the realities of the market. We're really looking at facing our issues and challenges. And indeed, I think we've seen a couple of, the chess pieces are certainly being moved at the moment to realistically address some of these challenges, some of these issues and challenges that are inevitably ahead of us for a very exciting 2016. Alex, let's perhaps drill down into individual media channels, and it could be a media channel, also a media agency, but also wanted to, TV, you mentioned TV already, and probably for me that has been a significant channel of change for want of a better term, this year. And I know this partly because the MediaScope's, they are updated in real time. The digital MediaScope was always the one for a very long time that kept me on my toes, with multiple updates on a monthly basis. That seemed to really stream off at the end part of this year, and it was the TV MediaScope that was keeping me very busy. Lots going on there with with launches and moving into programmatic and so on. Any specific channels that you've seen significant shifts in this year, Alex?
I think what your question is there, Denise, because I'm getting a little bit of echo on your end there. So I think what I think TV has faced a big challenge this year, and I think that's probably the one channel that has been most severely disrupted. But that was sort of inevitable when we knew at the back end of last year that Netflix was going to properly launch in Australia, and that then forced the hand of the TV networks themselves to actually come out with their own streaming services with Stan and with Presto. So what we've really seen, we did a report a couple of weeks ago, sort of on the end of year ratings, and live TV this year in prime time went down 11%. Now that's the biggest drop it's had, I think, ever since the OzTAM ratings began. And so what we're seeing again is when we look at the top sort of 10, 15 shows of the year is live sport obviously dominates that. But then it becomes these reality shows. It's My Kitchen Rules, it's MasterChef, it's The Block, it's these sort of traditional franchises that are propping up TV. But I think sort of an interesting trend that seems to have emerged is that, people watch the sport or the block or something like that, and their numbers will hold up okay in live viewing, but then at sort of 9 p.m, that's what they're calling the sort of streaming prime time, where people will flick over from terrestrial TV and sort of live TV and actually then go onto Netflix, go onto Presto Stan, whatever else, and do their sort of binge watching and on-demand watching that they want to do. And that includes also the sort of network's own catch-up services as well. So, all of them are reporting good growth. So that's from SBS and ABC, obviously, on that end of the scale, right up to 7 and 9 and 10. They're all getting good growth. But there was an interesting report that we covered yesterday, which is talking about the experience on those catch-up services. And I think there's still a long way to go in terms of them actually making them a product that people really, really want to come to. So I think there's some interesting challenges facing them, and that's going to be a priority for them in the next few months.
Exactly, and I saw that article too, and certainly, as you said, people not having the best of experiences. But, I often think, in our industry, we seem to want everything to happen overnight. I think sometimes we forget that, we really are at the very start of a journey on so many different pieces of technology. And, what you said too about the TV stations really starting to recognise that they need to reach their audiences across multiple devices. I remember, it was only a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Kurt Barnett at Mumbrella 360, got up on a panel of all of the heads of the TV stations and said, if we start selling our inventory programmatic, we won't be a $3 billion a year business, we'll be a $3 million a year business. So, again, showing to me that this has been the year where the reality of the market has really hit a lot of media owners and indeed media agencies, and they've had to shift their strategies accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, we've had obviously the round of upfronts in the last few weeks, and 7 and 9 and SBS were all talking about programmatic and all talking about moving towards programmatically trading at least some of their inventory. I mean, I think what we've actually seen in the last 12 months is probably an understanding that programmatic doesn't just have to mean that sort of remainder inventory that has been associated with. So it's not just necessarily the bottom of the bucket. Suddenly, publishers are realizing they can set up DSPs and they can actually, sort of pick and choose and deal with partners on a more exclusive basis, but actually keep their rates up. And all they're doing is actually cutting out a lot of the work for the agencies and actually for themselves as well, in the long run, especially, obviously. And I think it'll be sort of interesting to see how that now comes through, because obviously we've had Foxtel doing it through MCN for the last sort of year or so. And they're obviously pioneering that space. So we can expect to see 10 on that in the next 6 months, as I understand it. And it'll be interesting to see sort of how that drives through. But obviously it's not just TV who are looking at programmatic. You know, the Outdoor Media Association are in the midst of sort of starting a rudimentary programmatic platform for be planning first off, and then move towards the sort of buying side of it as things progress. And then you've got things like radio who, you know, are now actively considering how do we use this programmatic idea and how do we actually start to trade inventory on a more live basis, because I think that, you know, it's what agencies are asking for, it's what marketers are asking for, and so if you're not on that sort of platform, you're going to lose out in the long run.
Yes, and to me the programmatic space has made great inroads this year, and we're not just remnant inventory. What we are actually is, you know, there's premium inventory and inventory we're releasing to our programmatic platform. And, you know, they want to start to see some good yield there. Of course, that space without its capability, ad blocking, ad fraud, the list goes on. I also think that next year, you know, be creative to really come to the party in terms of what can be achieved in programmatic. If we want right time, right place, right audience, then the creative message also has to match that. And I think, you know, we need creative to come on that, or the creative side of our industry to come on that journey with us.
Yeah, I think that's a very pertinent point, and I think 2016 is the year that we need to return creativity to marketing. We had a sort of interesting discussion, you know, last couple of weeks. We've been looking at doing our end of year wraps for Christmas time, and one of those is best 5, best 7 campaigns that have happened this year. And normally we get a list of a dozen, and we're sort of whittling it down from there. This year we were looking at it going, okay, there were these 2 or 3, and then what's sort of next? You know, what else really blew us away? What made an impact? And it feels like there's been a lot less big ideas this year, and people concentrating more on that sort of digital idea and doing maybe something cleverer with technology or something like that, but not developing a campaign platform as a whole. And I think it'll be interesting to see next year if that sort of big idea can be returned to the Australian industry and actually start to be implemented, you know, across different touch points.
Absolutely. We're going so off script here, Alex. I hope you're okay with that. But Megan not being able to join us, you know, I'm happy just to see where this conversation takes us. I hope you are too. Please, to those who are watching us live, you can come in and ask us a question through the Blood platform. So please feel free. I have a theory about, you know, the creative and the standard that we're at, and it actually comes back to that diversity that you and I will talk about in more depth. But if you think about a creative department is, you know, as we have discussed and we've recognised, and there's certainly a lot of great women in creative departments, there's no doubt about it, but I think this year a theme has certainly been that, you know, they're white, 35 and male. Do you think that that is perhaps a reason why the creative output isn't as it could be, because we need those diversity of views and diversity of experiences to really maximise the creative output?
I'm not sure you can pin that as the reason for why the creative output hasn't been as good this year, because they're the same white 35-year-old men who've been doing some fantastic creative, you know, for the last 6 years or longer. But I think what it does highlight is the fact that there are less views being challenged now. You know, yes. you end up with mates. You end up with people who are like yourself, who have the same views as yourself, maybe the same views as your clients, therefore, and You know, you've got less people actually capable of saying, well, hold on there, you know, if you're doing this thing, how's that going to reach this sort of 18 to 25-year-old demographic? Are you really speaking to women in this method? And how are you going to reach the even more increasingly important sort of ethnic communities in Australia? You know, and that's a difficult thing for a lot of marketers to do, because, you know, we're seeing obviously more immigration into Australia. We're seeing an increasing population in terms of, you know, people who don't have English as a first language, or people who are sort of second generation but don't have English spoken at home, and they rely on very different media to traditional sort of channels. So, you know, they might not be watching the 9s and 7s and so on. They might be getting their feeds from the internet. You know, they might not use Facebook. They might be using sort of WeChat or Weibo or one of these other platforms, for example. So if you're not looking at sort of these different methods and these different platforms and these different types of media, and sort of thinking, how can we create an idea that will go across all of these, or tailor this message to actually speak to these markets, then you're missing out on quite a large chunk of sales, effectively, which is what everyone's here to.
That's exactly right. And, you know, over a third of Australia's population is exactly that. Immigrants, English is a second language. I think 2016, a census due, so it will be interesting to, you know, to get an update on how Australia's population has evolved in the last 4 years. But I think that that's a really interesting point. We need to, you know, recognise that our industry is beyond, you know, from Sydney's point of view, the North Shore and the eastern suburbs, and, you know, the hipsters in Surrey Hills. I personally love I love my bubble, but I also love leaving my bubble, because I just, you know, it's a marketer's dream. My pastime is people watching. I love people watching outside the bubble. I always pick something interesting up that I wouldn't see, you know, living in Chatswood. All right, let's perhaps now move on to some specific things. So we want to talk about some specific issues that have happened. MediaPalooza and MediaCom this year, Alex, broke sort of in February, perhaps even a little earlier than that. But, you know, we've certainly seen some pretty significant changes in the industry this year based on that. And the whole question, I think, of, you know, as you touched on before, transparency and trust has been very at the forefront of everyone, but also, you know, thinking about that value chain. Are marketers in some ways reaping what they've sown in all of this? Oh, we've lost you there, Alex. Sound?
I'll put my sound back on, sorry, just beautiful.
Thank you. You maybe then based on what happened to Megan.
So no, MediaPalooza has been, that's perhaps an interesting place to start. So for those who don't know, MediaPalooza is effectively global pitches that have been dragging on throughout this year. We've seen a whole heap of massive brands, you know, your PHGs, your Unilever, right down to sort of Mercedes, Daimler, and a whole raft of companies. And I think, and that's affected, you know, the global markets, obviously, and that has the trickle-down effects to the Australian markets as well. And so what we've seen is a lot of business moving in Australia, which isn't necessarily reflective of the quality of an agency in Australia, but the fact that my marketer wants to align their business globally because they feel they want to have one agency to represent them in every market. And so inevitably, you know, that creates sort of issues for agencies, and some have had really great windfalls and others have lost out in quite a large way and had to sort of look again at their business because of that. But what we have, what we do also see with something like MediaPalooza is that, you know, there's an increasing frequency in these global pitches, and it's almost a constant sense of review now for a lot of agencies on some of these big accounts. And that means that they're constantly looking at their rates. They're constantly looking at, you know, where they can cut costs out for clients and therefore for themselves as well, where they can actually make a clip. Because at the end of the day, they are agents for these companies and they need to make some sort of margin on the media they're buying and on the products and services that they are providing. And a lot of these sort of big global clients don't want to pay more than 2 or 3% for that. And when you're supposed to be kicking up 20% to the sort of global overlords every year, where do you make that margin? Where do you make that cost? And I think that then has the sort of knock-on effect to the MediaCom thing that we saw earlier this year. So as a brief overview of what happened with MediaCom, it broke at the end of last year, sort of last November, that MediaCom had launched an internal audit because they'd found on, I think it was 3 or 4 clients, that there was a team who'd been misreporting TV figures. Now, what that effectively meant was that they'd been going in and altering the figures in audience reports to show that they'd hit their targets when actually they'd fallen well below them. And so there was this big review, it took 3 or 4 months, and it came out in March, the results of this review. And, you know, what that found was it was isolated to this small team, but it really cast a sort of light on that whole transparency issue, because a lot of these were big clients. We had KFC, you had Foxtel, you had IAG, big spenders who you don't want to piss off, but you also, they will have audits in process, they will have auditing processes that were going on, but it showed up a massive hole in that system where effectively agencies were self-reporting. And as you know, if you mark your own homework at school, there are some kids who are going to take advantage of that and get 100% every time. But what that's also then done is sort of drive this conversation now around transparency and around, more importantly, the marketer-agency relationship. You know, because this wasn't driven by money necessarily. This was a group of people who were probably quite overworked, probably saw the TV market and had these targets and suddenly couldn't hit those targets because TV in some of those audiences had fallen through a trapdoor. And so, you know, where that came down to is our clients compensating their agencies sufficiently to get the right kind of people working on their accounts, the right number of people working on their accounts, and are they actually putting media plans in place that are realistic and achievable? And I think that it has been a big issue through this year. And it's one that we've seen now with a number of groups actually coming out with sort of transparency manifestos and, you know, explaining to their clients how they're doing that. Having said that, though, I think there are still major issues which are facing a lot of agencies, and that comes down to this programmatic space, again, which we were talking about earlier, where, you know, there is a sort of a feeling, certainly, that I'm a client and I'm giving you this money and I can see these ads coming out at the end. I don't actually know how much you're paying for those ads. I don't know who sat between you and that media vendor and who's taking a clip of that stuff along the way. And so, you know, if I'm paying you $2, for example, for a CPM, how much of that $2 is actually going to the media at the end? How much is the agency taking out? And how much are you buying those CPMs for back and then selling them to me? You know, that's an area that agencies seem quite reluctant to engage on at the moment. And I think that's probably going to have to change in 2016.
Yes, and certainly the trend does seem to be toward marketers bringing that programmatic expertise in-house. That, of course, doesn't come without its own challenges. As everyone knows, programmatic is supposed to be automated, but it is in fact a very labour-intensive manual process still. So, you know, there's a lot of tech that you've got to get your head around. I mean, thinking again about that digital MediaScope, there's a lot of players in there that you have to get your head around, and a lot of sort of parts of the process. So complex and fast-moving, to say the least. But yes, certainly the trend that marketers are bringing that in-house. And of course, you know, as you said, Alex, those cost pressures, you know, we see lots of symptoms based on those low margins that marketers are now putting on agencies. You know, a young a young sort of workforce, a young inexperienced workforce, perhaps stepping up into roles that they're not quite ready for, perhaps contracting in the media vendors that you work with rather than looking at sort of new and different opportunities, perhaps some rebates, perhaps some value banking. I mean, all of these things to me are symptoms of that bigger picture, which all comes down to, you know, everyone's got to make some money. And as you said, the overlords, you know, the holding companies that, you know, are probably about to get a little bigger in our market. We'll talk about that in a moment. You know, that also makes it very challenging, to say the least. Any other big issues? I want to talk about diversity, but anything else that's really struck you as a major event for the year?
You probably shouldn't move past this without talking about sports rights quickly. And this maybe loops back a little bit to the TV conversation we were having earlier, but it also hooks very nicely into sort of digital as well. Because obviously we've seen the AFL and NRL end up really with sort of same deals, but with a lot more money now on the table for the codes, and I think they both ended up achieving what they wanted to. AFL was about 2.1 billion and NRL 1.8 billion over 5 years, and you've got 9 and 7 and Telstra and Fox Sports as the 4 broadcast partners around that, and that's sort of tied that up now till 2021, 2022. So that's a long period of time. But the really interesting one that happened, and it almost sort of snuck out and snuck through without many people noticing initially, was Optus actually taking the English Premier League rights. Now, yes. Well, that sort of sounds, oh, it's English Premier League, it's on the other side of the world. And as you can tell, I'm an Englishman, so I obviously have an interest in the English Premier League, but so do millions of other people in this country. You know, football's the fastest growing sport here. Or soccer, as some people insist on calling it. It's definitely football. You know, it's got a growing fan base. It's trying to develop in this sort of country. And what we've seen is Optus sneak in and to steal those rights away from Fox Sports.
Yes.
From next season.
Yes. And
that's not just the digital rights or mobile rights. It's also the broadcast TV rights as well. Now, Optus wasn't really being looked at as a player who could come in and be a media company. You know, they were still very much being looked at as a telco, and they were doing other things with something like Clever Boy, for example, and trying to move a bit more into the product space. But then, out of nowhere, they come and steal these rights, and it's a major play because we don't know. They haven't announced how they're going to roll this out, but it gives them now an opportunity to do a tie-up with Fetch TV, for example, and you know that might be a major boost to that platform because there are a lot of people who will be subscribing to Fox Sports just for the EPL, and if they can get that on Fetch, they'll move to the Fetch platform. The other thing they can do, of course, is to bundle it up and serve it over the top themselves. You know, create an app or a service and allow people to pay them directly to subscribe for it. And you know, most of these games happen overnight. So if I can wake up in the morning and watch my team's game as live, which isn't really an option at the moment, the way that Fox Sports broadcasts it on the red button and on multi-view, so you can't record a game, then that's suddenly going to become very attractive as well, because that, you know, fills a need void for a lot of fans, and a lot of these fans are very passionate. Also, a lot of these fans are fairly well off. You know, you're not talking about a demographic that, you know, doesn't have a bit of money. There's a lot of sort of immigrants to the country. They've come in, they might be on slightly higher salaries. And I bet a lot of them will be living in that sort of eastern suburbs bubble or North Shore bubble there. But therefore, that's a great platform to advertise on, right? That's a great audience that you want to be talking to. So it's created this whole sort of range of issues and opportunities as well. And the other thing we might see is Fox Sports ending up paying Optus to actually bring those rights back to the Fox Sports platform, and Fox Sports end up paying more, and Optus end up making a nice clip off that.
Perhaps not based on what we're seeing with I'm not a football follower as much as you, Alex, but the A-League. Perhaps that's why we're seeing a lot of the news limited sport journalists come out against what's going on with the A-League at the moment. Again, thinking about another slightly different topic, but media ownership. And I think, again, a symptom of the media war that we're seeing is a lot of the media companies are really jostling before some level of expected media ownership change. But it's not within the interest for the News Limited journalists at the moment to be talking about the success of football or soccer. It's more within their interest to be talking about, what's going on in AFL and the NRL.
Yes and no, because don't forget, News Corp owns Fox Sports. Fox Sports are the big broadcaster for the A-League. So it's also not in their interest to talk down the A-League because they need viewers. They need to sort of gain traction for that. And the A-League rights are up, I think, next year for review. And my understanding is Fox Sports are in a very, very strong position to renew those. And I don't think a lot of other broadcasters are going to be looking at picking those up this time around. So it's not in their interest necessarily to go too hard in something like the A-League. But to go back to the media ownership thing that you were talking about there before, in a lot of ways that's been the biggest non-event of the year. So it was something coming into the year that a lot of people are talking about, a lot of people are expecting. And I'd love to see an analysis actually of the amount of column inches that have been written across, the trade press and the nationals as well, with, media reform, talking to Malcolm Turnbull when he was there, and now Fifield, he's in place as communication minister. But the fact is that while a lot of media companies want this, because at the moment we've really got an anti-competitive sort of set of rules where companies like Google and Facebook and even your Telstras and Optuses and things like that aren't regulated in the same way that your free-to-air TVs are, your radio networks are, and your newspaper owners are. And all those are mediums that are threatened by digital. Yes. And yet can't do anything about that because they are being restrained by these rules that had a reason in the sort of late 80s and the 90s and even the early noughties when they were put in place. But now are pointless because what we're seeing is TV networks starting to live stream their content. So now you can get 7, I think 9 are going live soon as well. And iView have also done live streaming, but with 7 and 9 particularly, you can get those in the regional areas now. So suddenly you can see 7 or 9's ads on that as opposed to their regional network affiliate ads. And there's a threat there to how much money the regional affiliates may lose because one benefit of that for fans of something like The Block or The Voice or My Kitchen Rules, if you're living in WA and you actually want to watch that live and participate in the conversations that go on social media around it, then you can now because you can just live stream that, and there's probably ways to get it to your TV, and you can certainly do it on your mobile devices and your desktop or your laptop or whatever else, and actually get that as live. And I think that is probably going to be one of the bigger sort of areas that impacts. Local news is local news, and other programming people don't have the lust for in terms of need the immediacy, need to get that live. But that live TV thing, that's a real challenge, I think, for some of these guys.
That's exactly right, and you're right. We all know that we need some level of leadership ownership reform because it's obviously inhibiting growth, and we're certainly seeing some of our more traditional Australian-based media businesses, they can't, as you said, Alex, they can't compete based on the media ownership laws that they have to abide by at the moment. But the question is when. We've had the government just seems to me to be dealing with major issues. They can't get to a lot of these, supposedly smaller issues. Next year, nothing's happened this year. We'll come back from the break next year and the government will be in election mode. So, is it then going to get on media ownership? Then, if they do get something up, saying it and doing it are completely different things. When you have the crossbenchers, when you have a hostile Labor Party, and then you have a Senate that is incredibly heavily represented through Australia's regional areas, including, Tasmania. I just see it's going to be a difficult, quite long road ahead to get what we want. And then, the question in my mind also is, does that mean that we will have more concentration of media ownership in Australia? News Limited particularly, very cashed up, ready to, already positioning the deck chairs. Lots of JVs happened this year. Is the fear that they're going to completely dominate the newscape, and then push their agenda? See, now my opinions of News Limited are coming out.
It's News Corp, don't forget, not News Limited.
Oh, sorry, News Corp, sorry. Yep.
I mean, look, we see the Nielsen numbers that come out today, the online news rankings,
Yes.
and news.com.au is still the biggest website in Australia, but then number 2 is the SMH, which is owned by Fairfax, obviously, and then number 3 is the ABC News website. So, people are using a range of news services and that kind of thing. Now, what we are seeing is newspapers are going to continue to decline. And in fact, there's an interesting podcast from the Media Report by the ABC. They interviewed Chris Mitchell, who's retiring today as editor of The Australian. And he talks about the fact that, he thinks The Australian and the Australian Financial Review will probably be okay in terms of retaining a print product of some description. But the local papers, as in, Sydney Morning Herald, Daily Telegraph, Herald Sun Age, Courier Mail, yada, 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 what we end up seeing is one-paper towns. So, the other products will remain online, but there'll only be one printed newspaper. But having said that, we see Greg Highwood over at Fairfax talking about the fact that, they print newspapers because there's still a small number of people who want that, and some of them are quite influential people. But all a newspaper is now is a sort of snapshot at what's happened at that moment at 9 p.m. the evening before. And when you're waking up at 6, 7 a.m. the next day, most of that news is either out of date, been disproven, or completely moved on and off the agenda. If you log on to any news website and compare it to the newspaper masthead that is associated with it, more often than not, the front page story won't be that high up on the front of the news page.
Yep. That's
but in terms of that sort of consolidation and News Corp pushing their agenda, I mean, News Corp always has a certain view of the world, and that comes through having a very, very powerful proprietor in Rupert Murdoch, who has a group of very driven and powerful editors who have a certain acquiescence with that worldview. But having said that, Rupert's shown he's not stuck to dogma or not affiliated to one particular party if he doesn't see them as sort of being most beneficial for business, and especially his business. So you see that in the UK particularly, where he's flip-flopped in the last sort of 20 years between the Labour Party and the Conservatives, depending on, who he thinks is going to have sort of best influence or has the best relationship with, if you like. So, I think News Corp will continue to grow influence here. But I think that's also going to be sort of countered by the wave of news sites that are coming in. So your Guardians, your Huffington Post, a range of other things that, are smaller, more niche, but younger people might go to get their news. Say BuzzFeed, for example, which are a lot more left-leaning than most of the...
You're right. I think, there are if you want to, you can get your views from a broad range of platforms now. The question that always, the barrier to become a media owner now is nil. Anyone can start a blog and have a voice or a Twitter account or so on. But of course, the issue that I always come back to when I think about, people, starting these different platforms is the monetisation. And New Matilda is a great example of that. a long-time independent online news publisher with a great brand, a really strong brand in the market, but they get their money through donation. They don't go near advertising, and they run on the smell of an oily rag, but they continue to pump out, very independent or supposed independent journalism. So it'd be interesting to see, but certainly this year that's been a theme for me for the year too, is the pot shots that the media seems to be throwing at each other. So, news at ABC, ABC back at news at Fairfax. Just yesterday, the inquiry into Q&A's left-leaning. Ray Martin came out with his decision on that and said they are not left-leaning. They're actually very unbiased. So that will be certainly interesting. Alex, let's touch on diversity. You wrote a great article in the midst of the Leo Burnett furore, and I should say Leo Burnett's certainly not the only agency. They certainly got pinned for a few weeks there, but I think we should also recognise not the only agency, media agency, publisher in the country that perhaps a similar kind of issue. But you wrote a great article really saying that, look, it's time. It's 2015, it's time we got our act together. And diversity, of course, not just in gender. We do really have to recognise that diversity comes in many forms. What comments can you make a couple of weeks out from the furore surrounding Leo Burnett?
Yeah, I mean, as you say there, Leo Burnett are not the only people sending out press releases trumpeting the 3 white male, 5 white male new hires in the creative department, in the media department, anything else. I think what we've seen is that creative departments are probably, the sort of microcosm of what's gone wrong in the industry. But then senior management as well is also hugely underrepresented. If you look at the numbers, I think it's 80% male, 20% female. But that's a real skew that doesn't make much sense, because then you look at, where a lot of leaders come from the department, which is the client services, so the suits effectively. That's 67% female, I think, skewed in this country, since 33% male. So a lot of these men are rising up then to these senior roles and leapfrogging their female colleagues for various reasons, and we don't have time to go into sort of all the reasons that are behind why so many women drop out of the workforce and that kind of thing. But I think that the main issue is you've got men at the top who aren't necessarily trained at sort of looking or hiring people, sort of looking at things through fresh eyes. We like to hang out with people who are like us. It makes for a more harmonious workplace if everyone is of a similar mindset and a similar type. What that doesn't make for is a very innovative, driven or exciting workplace. You might produce 1 campaign or 2 campaigns that are great, but what you won't be doing is sort of building for the future and actually redesigning your models and that kind of thing. So I think, this whole thing was triggered by a lady called Cindy Gallop, who's a very, very prominent campaigner on these diversity issues. She's founded Make Love Not Porn, and she really fights for sort of women's rights, but also ethnic minority rights as well, and representation and diversity in the industry. And it was interesting to see 18 months ago we did a series looking at this exact issue. It didn't really get much traction with the industry because people don't want to necessarily know about it. People aren't necessarily wanting to talk about it. Yet the second we get a famous woman coming out and using profanity on Twitter to have a go at a press release that's sent by probably the most famous agency in the country at the moment, it suddenly goes massive, and everyone has an opinion, and there's these sort of incredible comment threads that play out now, which show both sides of the issue. Some of it is, I think, mansplaining is a word that I've learned during this whole thing, which is, sort of white male view that is, there's nothing wrong, it's just hiring the best people and that's it. If they're not the best men for the job, then You know, why would you hire them? To the people who actually look at it through those other eyes and say, you know, it's hiring the best people that you can find who've won awards or who've been there and done it or that kind of thing, rather than hiring people on maybe potential, maybe what they can bring from an outside point of view, you know, who aren't necessarily tried and tested, but have a very different skill set to what you have. You know, if you have an agency full of people who are great at making great TV campaigns, then hopefully you'll make great TV campaigns. What you're not going to do is add the digital, mobile, every other element to that that's so important now. You know, that's obvious, but people aren't necessarily looking at these things until they go, oh crap, we need to add a digital element to this. Let's hire a digital team.
And that person tends to be, you know, a young millennial, you know, that perhaps, a digital native. So you get that kind of you know, then that's not adding to the diversity of of the decision-making process. But certainly diversity, you know, I think that's going to be a big issue. I mean, to me, it's an issue that comes up about every 12 months. We all get very emotional about it. We all talk about it. Everyone becomes quite outraged. And then it goes away again for another 12 months when something else happens. You know, as you know, Alex, this has been my year of action. So a lot of the initiatives that I've put to market this year have been, some tangible steps to really address some of these issues. So certainly Peggy's List launched in the last couple of months, and that is a list of women who are available to speak at industry events and comment on trade media articles. And that really just took off from the minute that I launched it. So I think that that's great that, you know, there are a group of us or a range of us in the Australian market that are looking to do some practical, real tangible solutions that address some of these issues. We don't necessarily want just another talk fest, but I think we also need to put a better business case around, you know, instead of it becoming an emotional argument, it needs to become a business argument. And that's something that I'll be working on in 2000. One of the initiatives I'll be adopting in 2016. Alex, I want to quickly now move to our Media Week. We've touched on STW, but also, of course, the government launched their innovations package, or ideas boom, was the hashtag that was going around Twitter that certainly got some pretty humorous comments. Again, I'll come back to my thing with it is I love that we've changed the conversation. In, you know, almost instantly when we had that change of government, we all of a sudden started hearing words like agile and innovative. They seem to be the only two words that we are hearing. But I'm also very aware that saying it and doing it are completely different things. And again, come back to my same argument with media ownership. We're going to get back from the Christmas break and we're going to be in election mode. Will he be able to deliver on the things that he's promised? I'm not so sure, but overall, I'm really pleased that the conversation is where it's at the moment. Alex, your views on the ideas boom?
Yeah, I think Australia has for a long time been behind the curve around this whole innovation. Having said that, something like yesterday or Atlassian floated for $6 billion, and that's just down the road from me here in Redfern. You know, but that's the exception to the rule, the real exception to the rule. You know, we're not seeing a lot of Australian entrepreneurs or a lot of Australian startups coming out and scaling globally, you know, and really making a success out of it. And that's a lot to do with the sort of framework that's in place at the moment, and the regulations and the disincentives there were for investment in startups, and the sort of disincentives that there were for people to take a risk. You know, if you're a company director and you're part of a company that then goes bankrupt, you know, that's 3 years that you're banned for being a director. You know, why would you take that risk if you're running a successful business and someone wants you to come on board and try and help out with this risky business? Why would you do that? You know, it doesn't make any sense. The tax breaks weren't there. It's not because there's a lack of clever, imaginative, inventive or innovative people or skilled people in Australia. And what we see is you look in most startups and we've actually got, you know, Australian somewhere or other in the mix, in the senior management, behind the tech, something like that. But most of them have headed off to Silicon Valley to actually fulfill those dreams or fulfill that potential, because there was not enough going on here, despite all the innovation hubs we had and that sort of thing. I mean, I think what's interesting, maybe from the media and marketing industry point of view, is that we've seen companies like Mondelez putting a sort of a real emphasis on bringing more startup culture into their business, you know, and in hooking up more technology, in finding new and different ways to communicate their messages to markets, and whether that's making a product or something like that. And I think what we'll see as part of these law changes is a lot more companies and marketers actually feeling they're more empowered to go and have a go, you know, to go and put some money into a startup, to go and, you know, hook up with a innovation hub or something like that, because there's a tax break there now for companies. So, you know, I think there's 40 grand you can stick in tax free. You know, the risk is lessened all the time. And I think you have to view these measures as a start point, you know, as the rest of the world moves along and the rest of the world innovates. Australia needs now to keep a real eye on this and keep moving as well. Otherwise, we're in danger of, you know, having that same thing where, you know, we're not seeing Australian entrepreneurs given opportunity.
I think that's a great point, Alex, that I hadn't thought of, is that, yes, it's all of a sudden allowed businesses to become a little more innovative and think that they're going to get supported. I said to someone during the week, I thought it was quite funny on the day that the innovations package was announced. My car was in the shop at the mechanic and I had 3 tradesmen around the house fixing a few little bits and pieces, and thought, you know, even though we're talking about innovation, I still need someone to fix my car and to fix my plumbing. So, you know, even though, yes, innovation, we still need those tradespeople as well. I think, you know, very interesting. Let's not take our eye off, you know, the range of careers that people can now have.
Absolutely. But what we need to do here is to actually help people who might traditionally go into plumbing to see that, okay, actually, I've learned some coding at school and I'm actually quite good at this. Maybe I could make a career out of being a developer or a coder or something like that, rather than just a manual labourer, you know. So it's just bringing up more on that particular.
And as my mechanic told me during the week also, you know, what they're doing has a lot of technical application in it now too. So, you know, I suppose in some ways that does sort of start to morph into science and engineering as well. So, interesting. We've gone well over time, I have to say, for just you and I chatting. We've kept it going well, Alex. I do quickly want to touch on STW and the news of the day. As you said, you know, it's taken a long time for this to become a reality. I think we've all seen that the day would have to come eventually. One of the comments on the Mumbrella article was that this would be advantageous to independent media agencies because clients would run from consolidation. What's your view on the STW?
So it's something that's been coming for quite a while. I don't think anyone's surprised by the news. I think what might be surprising is sort of the timing and actually the fact that this looks like it could well be wrapped up before the end of the year, when is WPP's financial end of year results are due December 31st, you know, so that's their financial year. So there's a good incentive for them to get this deal done and sort of wrap up whatever costs there are into this year and, you know, push forward other things for next year. So, you know, I think that timing thing, it's interesting because it's going to happen. I guess the interesting thing will be now to sort of look at the impact and actually what's going to come down the line, because, you know, WPP is already an enormous group here. STW is Australia's largest holding company for media and marketing companies. You know, you're looking at the likes of Icon, White Agency, Your Tongues, Brand Agency, And then there's a lot of joint ventures that they have already. So WPP already own 23.5%, and they've been steadily building. So you've got JWT, Ogilvy, Munshare, for example. These are all companies that they both have a stake in, and they've been co-managing and sit in various different reporting lines or whatever else. So at least a part of that, it'll help to sort of neaten up that structure and sort of consolidate that. But ultimately what we're going to see is consolidation.
Yes.
WPP already has a large infrastructure here. SCW has also got a large infrastructure here. Which part has to give?
Yeah.
I guess we'll wait and see, but inevitably there will be some retrenchment. Where there's agency duplication and where maybe there are some underperforming agencies, I think we'll see a lot more of them either offered to management for buyouts.
Conscience organisation.
A conscious organisation, when this time last week, they had a buyout, and I think that was a fairly rapid process. And I think we'll see maybe a couple of dozen more, because SCW has 70 companies on its books, and it had a stated aim to get down to 50. And so it's going to have to, make these divestments, and I think there's going to see a lot more, going in the next few weeks, as WPP won't want to take on a very long tail of small agencies that might be quite competitive to their bigger cash cow agencies.
So certainly the end of the year hasn't quite finished yet. There's still perhaps some bit of news left to report. But certainly been an exciting year. 2016, here we come, where again I think the message will be the only constant is change. But perhaps, again, some further realistic look at the market instead of, just everyone in denial. But it's certainly going to be a good year. Well, we might finish up now, but before we do, I really want to thank, this is the last live chat of the year, and I really want to thank everyone for their very strong support of MediaScope this year, and to you and the gang at Mumbrella too, Alex. This has been a great year for MediaScope. After very hard work, 7 or 8 years, this has been the year that a lot of the research that I produce have got traction. So I really want to thank the market for supporting me and for your ongoing interest and sticking by me as I've been finding my stride. Next year...
Hold on, Denise. Would you like to break some news?
Oh, yes.
New Group M CEO just been announced, and it is Mark Lolbach, the CMO of McDonald's.
Whoa. Okay, well that's...
So I'm gonna have to head off and write that one up now.
Yep.
That's big in the media world.
Thank you, Alex. That's my first bit of breaking news. Thank you. And it was just as we were finishing. Thank you, Alex, so much for joining us. We'll finish the recording now. And again, thank you to everyone for joining the live chat today. We'll finish up now. Happy New Year. Happy 2016.
Thanks, Denise, for having me.